Traveling the Vortex.
We're traveling the Vortex with the Fugitive Doctor and have landed at another cross-media event. I'm Glenn, and today we're taking a deep dive into the opening chapter of Circuit Breaker, the newest cross-media Doctor Who event. And like a lot of these modern multimedia arcs, this one doesn't begin with a TV episode or a comic or even a novel. It starts quietly, almost modestly, with a short story tucked away on the official website titled Calling the Doctor. And honestly, that's become something of a tradition. These online shorts have turned into the franchise's way of clearing its throat before the big performance. A little breadcrumb to get us curious. A teaser to set the tone. A chance to reintroduce familiar faces and hint at machinery that's about to start turning behind the scenes. What's interesting is how Calling the Doctor embraces the role. It doesn't try to be more than that. It's not pretending to be a lost episode or a secret chapter or some grand mythology. It's a mood piece, a setup, and it's comfortable being the first domino in a much larger chain. So what's it about? Unit scientist Petronella Osgood files an emergency report after a series of impossible events inside the Black Archive. Alien artifacts, each tied to a different species the Doctor has faced, being materialized out of thin air. A Dalek gunstick, a Sontaran helmet, a Carionite crystal, a clockwork droid mask, even an entire weeping angel appear without warning, each surrounded by a corrupted blue energy signature that scrambles audio and defies analysis. Osgood and her assistant, Andrew Turner, initiate lockdown protocols as more objects arrive, each accompanied by temporal distortions. Surveillance footage reveals the angel trapped by its own reflection, confirming that whatever force is sending these artifacts is powerful enough to manipulate time and space inside Unit's most secure facility. As time passes, Osgood's team discovers something far worse. The objects are ripping holes in time itself, creating unstable tears that threaten to unravel London and, possibly, the entire timeline. The Doctor seems to be the obvious suspect until new evidence suggests the opposite. The artifacts aren't messages, they're weapons deliberately removed from the Doctor's past to destabilize their history. If the Doctor's tools and encounters are being erased, then the Doctor themselves may be compromised or gone. Andrew poses a desperate solution. Contact an earlier hidden incarnation, the mysterious Fugitive Doctor, whose existence is buried in classified unit files. She may be the only version untouched by the sabotage. But Osgood hesitates. The fugitive is unpredictable, uncooperative, and largely unknown. With time fractures widening and reality beginning to warp, Osgood faces an impossible choice. Risk unleashing the Doctor she doesn't understand, or watch the timeline collapse. Let's start with the obvious highlight. Osgood is back. And that alone gives the story a pulse. Osgood is one of those characters who instantly elevates a unit narrative. She's smart without being smug, anxious without being helpless, and she brings that delightful blend of scientific rigor and fan energy that made her such a standout in the Moffat era. Whenever Osgood shows up, you know you're in for a story that's going to treat the lore with respect. She's the kind of character that can say Dalek gunstick with complete sincerity and make it feel like a legitimate scientific term. She's also the perfect anchor for a cross-media event. She's recognizable, she's beloved, she's flexible enough to carry the story without overshadowing the Doctor, and she's grounded enough to make sure that the stakes feel real. But her presence does something else, something structural. Unit stories can sometimes feel disconnected from the main show, like they're happening in a parallel bureaucracy, which occasionally bumps into the Doctor's adventures. Osgood bridges that gap. She's the connective tissue between the Doctor's world and Earth's attempts to keep up. She's the reminder that Unit isn't just filing reports, they're actively trying to understand the impossible. And in a story about artifacts appearing out of nowhere, about time fraying at the edges, about the Doctor's timeline being tampered with, Osgood is exactly the person you want in the room. And then there's Andrew Turner, Osgood's assistant. And look, he's fine. He's not breaking any new ground, but he's not dragging the story down either. He's the classic Unit junior, earnest, overworked, and a little eager to impress. What's interesting is how the story uses him. He's not comic relief, he's not a liability, and he's not secretly brilliant. He's functional. He's the guy who sees the impossible first. He's the one who pushes Osgood when she hesitates. And he's the one who brings up the Fugitive Doctor. which is a pretty bold move for someone who's probably still has to ask permission to use the good scanner. Right now, he's a narrative tool, but that's okay. In a story like this, someone has to be the person who says, Osgood, you might want to look into this. And Andrew fills that role without getting in the way. Then there's the parade of impossible objects. The story kicks off with a classic Doctor Who image, something impossible appearing where it absolutely shouldn't. In this case, a Dalek gunstick materializing in the Black Archive, and then a weeping angel, and then a whole assortment of alien artifacts from across the Doctor's history. Dalek tech, Sontaran gear, a Carionite crystal, a clockwork droid mask, and a weeping angel, corrupted and trapped by its own reflection. This is the kind of inventory that taps into the deep well of nostalgia without feeling like a cheap cameo fest. It's not, remember this, remember that? It's more of a forensic puzzle, a museum of impossibilities. And the corrupt blue energy signature tying everything together is a nice touch. It's a visual motif that hints at something bigger, stranger, and more dangerous. It's the kind of detail that tells you that the writers are planting seeds for later. The story also contains a familiar problem, removing the Doctor from the board. And this is where the story hits a snag. The central premise is the Doctor is being removed from the timeline, or being unable to intervene. It's familiar. It's very familiar. Doctor Who has explored this idea from just about every angle. Turn Left did it brilliantly. 73 Yards did it hauntingly, and Big Finish tackled it in All Mortality, and that's just scratching the surface. So when this story leans on the idea that the Doctor might be compromised or missing or unable to help, it's hard not to feel like we've been here before. But here's the twist that gives it life. The Doctor isn't absent because of a choice or cosmic accident. Someone is seemingly actively removing pieces from their timeline. Artifacts that should be in the Doctor's past are appearing in the present, destabilizing everything. That's clever. That's new enough to feel fresh. It's not, what if the Doctor never existed? It's, what if someone is rewriting the Doctor's history in real time? And that's a much more dynamic threat. And then we get the real hook, the fugitive Doctor, an incarnation who exists outside normal regeneration order, whose history is fragmented and whose timeline is already a puzzle. Andrew suggests that she might be the only version of the Doctor untouched by the sabotage, the one incarnation that the enemy doesn't know about. And that's a genuinely exciting idea. If you're going to revisit an old trope, at least bring a new Doctor to the party. The fugitive Doctor is still largely unexplored territory. She's a blank space in the mythology, a question mark with a police box. Giving her a central role in a cross-media arc could be a brilliant move, especially if the writers lean into her outsider status. One thing the story does well is tone. Unit procedural stories always have a certain charm, and this one leans into creeping dread. The idea of rips in time forming in London is classic Who, and the imagery is vivid enough to stick. There's a sense of fragility here, that the timeline is fraying, that the archive is becoming a pressure point, and that reality is thinning. It's not horror exactly, but it's unsettling in the right way. And it's the kind of unease that makes you lean forward, waiting for the next crack to appear. One thing I really want to highlight, because it's easy to overlook if you're just skimming the story, is the interactive component built into the web page. This isn't just a static short story, it's a little puzzle box. Throughout the text, the site drops subtle clues, inviting you to poke around and engage with the narrative instead of just reading it passively. The story hides passwords in its paragraphs, not in a frustrating cryptic way, but in a playful, if you're paying attention you'll catch it sort of way. Once you spot them, you can enter them into a field on the page, and that unlocks more context of what's happening inside the Black Archive. And look, it's not overly difficult. It adds a layer of fun, a sense that you're participating in the investigation alongside Osgood and Andrew. It's a small touch, but it goes a long way towards making the story feel like a bigger part of a larger unfolding mystery. It also fits the unit aesthetic perfectly. Unit stories often have the classified file vibe, and the interactive password mechanic leans into that. It makes the reader feel like they're accessing restricted intel, like they're part of the team. And for a cross-media event, that's exactly the kind of engagement you want. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Doctor Who's track record with cross-media arcs is mixed. Time Lord Victorious was ambitious, messy, and ultimately pretty fun. But Doomsday was weak, and it never really found its footing. Circuit Breaker could go either way. The opening chapter doesn't guarantee success, but it doesn't doom the project either. It's a foundation, a cautious one, and it's clear the writers are saving the big swings for later. The question is whether the arc will maintain momentum across formats. Can the comics, audio dramas, and other stories all feel like they're part of the same machine? Or will it scatter into disconnected pieces? So where does this leave us? Well, Calling the Doctor is a solid beginning. Not groundbreaking, not essential, but promising. It's a familiar setup executed with confidence, buoyed by Osgood's presence and the tantalizing possibility of a fugitive Doctor-centric storyline. Doctor Who has stumbled with these multimedia events before, but it's also pulled off some genuinely memorable ones. Time will tell which side Circuit Breaker lands on, but for now, I'm here for the ride. Have you read the short story? Are you excited for the Circuit Breaker cross-media event? Will you be following along? Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, cheers!